Hi everyone, welcome to our 7th Mussar webinar for adults. The topic is trust, Bitachon. I'm going to start out this webinar the way I start out all of the webinars, reminding you to share the interesting things that your groups are doing on our Chai Mitzvah Facebook page and to join our virtual conversation there. I'll send up the link in the follow-up email. So let's look at our agenda. Let's start with our themes. So today we're going to focus on trust, or bitachon. While we understand that trust in others and in ourselves is an important midah to cultivate, Jewish sacred literature addresses the concept mostly in reference to God. In this session, we're going to explore the Jewish concept of trust in God, while understanding that's a difficult belief for some Jews today. How might we combine a trust in God with something outside of ourselves, with a trust in ourselves and others? We'll discover in this lesson how Israel has struggled with the tension between self-reliance and trust in God, and faith and self-reliance, and how this paradox is played out in their Declaration of Independence. We're also going to explore how the notion of trust in God plays out politically in the United States, both now and in history. So with this in mind, let's look at the themes. 1, trust in others and in ourselves is an important midah to cultivate. 2, how might we combine a trust in God, something outside of ourselves, with a trust in ourselves and others? 3, Israel has struggled with the tension between faith and self-reliance. And 4, the notion of trust in God plays out politically in the United States as well. So, this is an interesting activity that you might like to start out this exploration with your participants. You find the reference to God and money. What you see here are 2 gold dollars. But if you look at our paper money and at our coins, they all say, "In God we trust" on them. So look at some money that says, "In God we trust," and ask your participants to join one of 3 groups. Those who can affirm the statement, "In God we trust," those who are not sure, and those who adamantly can't affirm it. And have them discuss in their groups what they feel about the topic, and also what is their definition of the word trust. Then come back together and have a member of each of the smaller groups report back to the larger group what their thinking is on "In God we trust," why they chose the group they're in, and also what is their definition of the word trust. Discuss with them, is trusting in oneself or others a rejection of a trust in God, or can you have both simultaneously? When I did this topic with the Chai Mitzvah teen educators, one rabbi pointed out that there's another word that also means trust, that's emunah. We discussed the difference between bitachon and emunah. Bitachon is like a surety, like a guarantee, whereas emunah is more faith, more faith-based trust. So later in the webinar, when we're focusing on the meaning of bitachon in modern Israel, it's going to be useful to think about our definitions of trust and how we feel bitachon or emunah, which more describes our own inner feelings about trust. It's kind of a spectrum. It's good to think about the different kinds of trust, bitachon or emunah, faith or more of a surety. So this leads us to the first text. It's from the Zohar, which you might know is the chief text of the Kabbalah. It says, "Not upon mortals do I put my trust, nor in any angel do I rely. Only in the God of heaven do I trust. You are the God of truth, whose Torah is truth, whose prophets are true, who acts generously with kindness and truth. In God do I put my trust. To God's holy, precious being do I utter praise." So before you begin the discussion with your participants, you might like to listen to this passage in song. This passage from the Zohar is traditionally sung in its original Aramaic when removing the Torah scroll from the Ark on Shabbat. So I'll send a link to the melody in the follow-up email. I think this link might also be in the booklet, but I'll send it out. And then listen to it and ask your participants if they think the Aramaic and the tune match the meaning of the words in English, and why. Now let's look at this text as a text, and let's discern what it means. So here are some questions. What mortals do you put your trust in, and why? What character traits are necessary to make someone trustworthy? This might also get into a discussion of role models, whether your participants feel they're a role model for someone, or whether they've had a role model that they'd like to talk about. Also, for me, I was looking into what it says about our pop culture. We have shows like we used to have American Idol or The Voice. We have celebrities whose only contribution seems to be the fact that they're celebrities, like the Kardashians. Yet I have a friend who actually admires Kim Kardashian because she can make money from doing nothing. So that's an interesting tangent that might also go to this. What is a role model, and where do we put our faith and our trust? This mystical text of the Zohar drew its ideas from a passage in the Bible, such as, "It is better to trust in God than to put confidence in any prince." How do your participants feel about this statement? Does it seem as if people believe that statement today? And if so, which people? And if not, why not? So these are interesting questions to bring up while looking at this text. Now let's go to the next text and see what it says. Okay, it says, "I shall keep Shaviti, the eternal, before me always." And then you can see in Hebrew it says, "Shaviti Hashem lenegdi tamid," and that's exactly what it says on the image you see there. So this is a physical reminder of this text. There's a Jewish ritual object called the Shaviti, a piece of art for visual focus on God's name, so we can physically as well as spiritually keep God before us always. These pieces of scribal art are hung on the eastern wall facing Jerusalem of synagogues and homes to remind us that we are always standing in the presence of God. So you can ask your group members, do they ever have a physical reminder, a visual reminder in their own lives, not just necessarily of God, but of anything that they need to be reminded of? This Shaviti that you see here is actually from my home. It's a tile that we bought once in New Mexico. And while it reminds me to keep God before me always, it can't always remind me of where east is because my home moves. It's a boat, so sometimes it's not on the eastern wall. And you might ask your participants, do they actually have a Shaviti or a Mizrach in their homes? A Mizrach is similar to a Shaviti, but it doesn't necessarily have God's name. It's to remind you of where Jerusalem is or where Israel is. And since we're going to be connecting this topic to Israel, that's very relevant. And there's an activity and a practice later that will bring this to life and keep it relevant in future times that your group gets together. But let's look at some discussion ideas first about this text. What does it or could it mean to your participants to keep the eternal before them always? For students of Mussar, this verse from Psalms is a reminder to emulate God, to make compassionate, wise, and holy choices. And you might ask your participants, was there ever a time that you chose to do the right thing because you were aware of God? And you might discuss what this time was. Okay, we'll go to the next slide, which is text 3. And let's go back and connect what we just spoke about to Israel. The next text is from the Israeli Declaration of Independence. And as I'm reading it, think about the words Rock of Israel and what they might mean in the context of the history of the state of Israel. So this is from the Declaration, the ending of the Declaration of Independence. Placing our trust in the Rock of Israel, we set our hand to this declaration at this session of the Provisional Council of State on the soil of the homeland in the city of Tel Aviv on this Sabbath Eve, the 5th of Iyar, 5708, the 14th day of May, 1948. So the historical background to this text can really help us understand the evolution of the idea of trust from a purely religious notion about God to a notion of self-reliance that's part of the Israeli ethos. Jewish religious leaders wanted the declaration to clearly refer to God, while many secular leaders preferred a separation of church and state. So Rock of Israel was a compromise phrasing. And David Ben-Gurion, who became, of course, later the first prime minister of Israel, said that for him, the phrase Rock of Israel was a compromise, and it meant the Bible or the Israeli army. So this push-pull between the secular and the religious leaders in Israel continues, as you know, to this day. And it's up to you whether you want to take the discussion to a more political vein or whether you want to stick to the spiritual discussion at hand. Hold on, I have to welcome Sheila Fox. Hi, Sheila. I'm going to unmute you. Hi, it's good to see you. Resume share. You know, it was nice to see you the other day on the virtual Mussar, and it is nice as well to see you today. So if you find that there's anything you'd like to say or you'd like to share, you know, please feel free. And I'm going to get back. We were just talking about the push-pull in Israel between trusting in God, having faith, and trusting in other people, and in your own strength and your own ability to make things happen. So, and we were discussing how this is sometimes a challenge for modern Jews today, that having complete faith is not always an easy thing to do. So what I wanted to say about this, where they put Rock of Israel in to mean either God or trust outside of or trust within ourselves. I think one of the reasons for this push-pull is that Judaism is a covenant religion. And this concept of religion as a covenant between God and humanity, which is particularly Jewish, you can find a lot of times in the Torah. And it implies that we do something in order to get something, sort of. I'm going to, okay. So in other words, you can define, there are many examples of Torah, and it's reflected in the actions of modern Jewish people. We believe in God, but we believe that we also need to help ourselves. And I think that's a very modern and very Jewish concept. You might want to ask your participants about this. And again, if anybody would like to give their thoughts, I'm very happy to hear. Another way we can think about what we feel about God is the names we use for God. Some might be ambiguous enough that agnostics feel comfortable using them. For example, source of life, mystery, Rock of Israel, or teacher of Torah, among others. You might want to ask your participants, or if anybody would like to chime in, what names of God you feel comfortable with. It's easy to find a whole list of them, and I'll send a link out to that as well later, so that if you'd like to look at this with your participants later on, you can look through these names and see which define the way you feel comfortable with God. It'll be interesting to see what the phrase Rock of Israel means to your participants as well. And Israel's not the only country with this complicated connection to God. As we were saying before, the United States Declaration of Independence refers specifically to God. It says, quote, to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and of God's nature entitle them. So you might want to discuss the similarities between the U.S. Declaration of Independence and the Israeli Declaration of Independence. There are a lot of similarities, and I can also send out links to both of those online, so that if you want to look at them, print them out, use them, you can. What does placing our trust in the Rock of Israel mean to you? Would you have a different response if the word rock were capitalized? Note that being able to understand this phrase either as a secular term or as a religious term, as a presence of God, was exactly the intention of the authors of the Israeli Declaration of Independence. And now, as I said before, we're going to talk about the meaning of bitachon. Emunah we translate as faith. Bitachon in modern Hebrew means not just trust, but security. It refers to the security checks you pass when you're boarding a plane to go to Israel. Even before entering other public buildings in Israel, like shopping malls, cafes, post offices, you go through bitachon. Modern Hebrew words such as warranty, insurance, and social security all use the same word, the root bitachon. Misrata Bitachon is the Ministry of Defense, and Bitachon is a warranty for an electrical appliance. Bituach refers to car or home insurance, and Bituach Leomi is a national social security. You know how you ask someone betach when you're asking them, like, do you really mean it? Well, that's kind of saying, do you trust yourself? Are you sure? So that's something that we can look at when we're talking about faith and trust, emunah or bitachon. That will be helpful in your discussions. Now I want to look at some practices that will be very helpful in taking this this midah and building it as the month goes on. The first one is a kavanah, an affirmation or intention of your own choosing. We saw the Shviti and we saw the Mizrach. You can make one of your own and put it on your own wall of your home to remind yourself of God's presence and to orient your heart and mind towards Jerusalem. Let's think about what your passage or image might be, what Jerusalem means to you. You can go through your heart, or you can do some research. Yerushalayim Shel Zahav, Libi B'Mizrach, a Jerusalem of gold, or my heart is in the east, are some very well-known phrases. And there are beautiful images of Jerusalem that you could download, print out, and put on your wall if you want to. Aside from the Shviti, there's another Jewish ritual object called the Mizrach, which literally means east, that could also be placed in the eastern wall of your home or synagogue. It doesn't have to be a visual meditative tool like a Shviti, but a simple reminder of which way is east. And these are usual beautiful places of art as well. You might want to use the phrase, God is with me, I shall not fear, or I shall keep the eternal before me always, as a prayer focus in the days and weeks ahead. Some other interesting practices. The issue of security is a big one in Israel, as it is elsewhere around the world. Even if you haven't been threatened physically, think of some frightening situations that you've lived through. Fear and a sense of insecurity can be addressed by spiritual practice. The last line of the well-known Shabbat hymn, Adon Olam, is, God is with me, I shall not fear. So having a phrase such as this one could be helpful in times of fear and anxiety. I could suggest writing it, putting it in your pocket. It's there. You could reach in and hold on to it when you're in a situation that requires a little trust. The phrase, in God we trust, is found on every coin and paper bill in the United States. So a nice practice for the next month to build your trust, your bitachon, to think about it. Every time you pay with cash, think about what it means to you. In God we trust. Now, one of the things we talked about, our theme's not only about the tension between trust in God versus trust in yourself or others, but it's also about the relationship of our own efforts within the context of trust or confidence in something other than self. It has to do with control. So ego is involved when we think we can control the outcomes or that everything depends on us. So you might want to journal or just think about the following questions or discuss them with your group. How can I let go, surrender, and trust that not everything depends on me? How can I let a sense of trust renew me when I feel depleted? Now, if you are a person like myself who has a lot of trouble not being in control. You might not be able to answer these questions, but you might want to keep them in mind as you go through situations in your life. Wait a minute, I should let go. Everything doesn't have to depend on me. So in addition to journaling or answering these questions, it's a good idea to just remember these ideas. Another fun thing to do with your group, if you're willing to test your sense of trust in another and your own trustworthiness, try a blindfold trust exercise with a friend. You can find some at this link. For example, when you blindfold one person and the other person gives them verbal directions of how to get around a room. Things like that. Another trust exercise, which is not just for kids, for a group of people, is called Willow in the Wind. That's one of those where you join arms and someone runs towards you and you drop your arms and they go through and you see whether they can do it without flinching. I know it sounds like it's for kids, but it actually could be a lot of fun to do with adults as well. But in both cases, the important part of this exercise is a debrief. What did you notice about your own sense of trust in self and in others as you did this exercise? That's what makes it a really important practice. Now I'm going to give you some links to good additional information. This is really interesting. In God We Trust was only added to U.S. currency in 1956, 2 years after President Dwight D. Eisenhower pushed to have the phrase "under God" inserted into the Pledge of Allegiance. This link here tells us more about it. I know that I was part of that generation where people didn't want to say the Pledge of Allegiance in school. They refused because of this and were like, I'm not one of those people, but they were exercising their separation of church and state. So it might be an interesting thing to read and discuss as well. Then there's a nice article, Contemplating a Shviti. It includes spiritual guidance for using a shviti. So if you make a shviti and you hang it in your home, you can look at this article and you can see ways to use it, to meditate and to sit near it. We're reminded that prayer doesn't have to be done with words. Contemplating a visual image can be a prayerful and meditative process as well. And so that's a very nice thing to do as well. Now, some great supplemental materials for this too. The first one, The Economy of Trust, Commerce with a Sense of Human Connection. So this is a bunch of TED's talks, not just one. And they all talk about the ways our economy can foster trust and dispel the stranger danger fear. It's interesting because these days, people are trusting more in Uber, Airbnb, Craigslist, things where people and other people work together to solve a problem. They're people that they don't know. They're not really there. You find them and you figure it out yourself. And it's interesting because some people will trust this more than they'll trust a regular store or a regular professional kind of situation. So it's interesting to see this economy of trust, these TED Talks. And another one is Being Trustworthy a Mitzvah. So what is the Jewish perspective on trust? Is it ever permitted to betray someone's trust? What type of person would you trust? Is being trustworthy a mitzvah? So you can hear from rabbis across the denominational spectrum if you go to this link, and it's an interesting supplemental material. And the third one is called Building a Holy Playground, when leaders stop controlling and start trusting. This woman, Karina Zilberman, she's the director of the 92nd Street Y Shababa Network, and she takes us on a journey of this project, how they created this Friday morning Shababa experience. And what she's saying is that, and this is very good if you're in a work situation where you either feel you're being controlled or you feel you have freedom to express. For her, it was a positive experience because of these 4 steps. Welcoming the unexpected, being present, having a holy intention or kavanah, and having emunah, trust, which is a little different than bitachon. We talked about it. So she implores us to build a playground, trusting that when we allow for freedom of possibility, good things happen. And that's a good lesson in the workplace to relate to this midah. The last thing I want to talk about is the part of your source book on the back that says personal reflections. Each source book includes questions on the back cover to help focus the participants on their independent projects. At the end of the session, take a couple of minutes, look at the questions, and talk to your participants. And they can answer them how they relate to this topic. So the questions that are here are: does your social action project put you in a position where others put their trust in you? Explain. And how does your trust in yourself express your choice of independent projects? Like, how did you choose what you chose to do? So these are good questions to either discuss or to have them write the answers to, depending on your group. And you can do that however you feel works for your group. So this brings me to the Q&A portion of our session. Is there anything that you'd like to ask? Okay, well, if not, then I'm going to say thank you so much for joining, and I will send all those links in the follow-up email, and it's good to see you. Thanks. Bye.